The theme of reconciliation has been so constantly harped on by unworthy authors that it is easy to become convinced in this time given to indignation and scandal that it never did and never could have any concrete content. It seems to emanate from the most superficial areas of novelistic consciousness. To put reconciliation in its proper perspective, we must look on it as the conquest of a possibility that has long been denied the writer. The conclusion must be considered as a successful effort to overcome the inability to conclude. The criticism of Maurice Blanchot can help us in this task. Maurice Blanchot portrays Franz Kafka as the exemplary representative of a literature doomed to inconclusiveness. Like Moses, Kafka's hero will never see the promised land. This inability to conclude, Blanchot tells us, is an inability to die in the work and to free oneself in death. The impossible conclusion defines a literary space which is not beyond, but this side of reconciliation. The fact that this space is the only one accessible to our own time of anguish is disquieting, but not surprising to anyone who bears in mind the evolution of the structure of the novel. The fact would not have surprised Dostoevsky, who has already given us characters doomed to inconclusiveness and was traversing Maurice Blanchot's literary space at the time he wrote Notes from the Underground. This story, like so many of Kafka's and those of writers after Kafka, has no conclusion. And here's a quote from that book. The notes of this paradoxalist do not end here, however. He could not refrain from going on with them, but it seems to us that we may stop here. Oh no, that's from Notes from the Underground. I'll read it again. So that's the conclusion of Notes from the Underground. Quote, the notes of this paradoxalist do not end here, however. He could not refrain from going on with them, but it seems to us that we may stop here. End of quote. Notes from the Underground is the turning point between Romanticism and the novel, between the preceding inauthentic reconciliations and the authentic reconciliations which follow. The great novelists cross the literary space defined by Blanchot, but they do not stay there. They push beyond that space toward the infinity of a liberating death. In contrast to the incompleteness of the contemporary narrative and incompletion, which in the best writers reflects not a passing fashion, but a particular historical and metaphysical situation, the conclusion of the novelistic work embodies not only a historical, but an individual possibility finally and triumphantly actualized. The great novelistic conclusions are banal, but they are not conventional. Their lack of rhetorical ability, even their clumsiness, constitute their true beauty and clearly distinguish them from the deceptive reconciliations which abound in second-rate literature. Conversion in death should not seem to us the easy solution, but rather an almost miraculous descent of novelistic grace. The truly great novels are all born of that supreme moment and return to it the way a church radiates from the chancel and returns to it. All the great works are composed like cathedrals. Once again, the truth of remembrance of things past is the truth of all the great novels. We carry within us a whole hierarchy of the superficial and the profound, the essential and the subordinate, and we apply it instinctively to the novel. This hierarchy, which is often romantic and individualist in character, conceals from us certain essential aspects of artistic creation. For example, we are in the habit of never taking Christian symbolism seriously. Perhaps because it is common to many works, both mediocre and sublime. We attribute a purely decorative function to the symbolism when the author is not a Christian, and a purely apologetic function when he is a Christian. Truly scientific criticism would discard all these a priori judgments and would note the amazing points of similarity among all the different novelistic conclusions. If only our prejudices pro and con did not erect a watertight barrier between aesthetic experience and religious experience, we would see the problems of creation in a new light. We would not cut off Dostoevsky's work from all its religious meditations. In the Brothers Karamazov, for example, we would discover texts as important for the study of novelistic creation as those of the past recaptured. And we would at last realize that Christian symbolism is universal, for it alone is able to give form to the experience of the novel. We must therefore look at this symbolism from the point of view of the novel. The task is all the more difficult since the author himself sometimes tries to throw us off the scent. Stendhal attributes Julian Sorel's German mysticism to the extreme dampness of his prison cell. But the conclusion of The Red and the Black remains a meditation on Christian themes and symbols. In it, the novelist reaffirms his skepticism, but the themes and symbols are nonetheless present in order to be clothed in negations. They play exactly the same role as in Proust or Dostoevsky. We shall see everything which touches on these themes, including the monastic vocation of Stendhal's heroes, in a fresh light which the author's irony cannot hide from us. Here, as before, we must interpret the novelists by comparing them to one another. We should not treat the religious question externally, but if possible, look on it as a purely novelistic problem. The question of Christianity in Stendhal, the question of mysticism in Proust and in Dostoevsky, can be understood only through comparisons. If the seed does not die after it is, if the seed does not die after it has been sown, it will remain alone, but if it dies, it will bear much fruit. The verse from St. John reappears in several crucial episodes of the Brothers Karamazov. It expresses the mysterious connections between the two deaths in the novel. The link between the convict prison and Dmitri's spiritual healing. The link between the mortal sickness and the redeeming confession of the unknown visitor. The link between Ilyusha's death and the charitable work of Alyosha. Proust has recourse to the same verse from the Gospel of St. John when he wants to explain to us the part played by sickness, that younger sister of death, in his own creation. Quote, when sickness, like a harsh spiritual director, caused me to die to the social world, it did me a good service, for if the seed does not die after it is sown, it will remain alone and will not bear much fruit, end of quote. Madame de Lafayette, too, could have quoted St. John, for one finds in The Princess of Cleves the sickness of Proust's narrator. This sickness comes at the same point in the novel's development as in Proust and has exactly the same spiritual consequences. Quote, the necessity of dying, which she saw was very near, made her used to detachment, and the length of her illness made it a habit. Worldly passions and activities appeared to her in the same way as to people who have broader and yet deeper vision, end of quote. This breadth and depth of vision belongs to the new being who is literally born of the death. The verse from St. John serves as an epigraph for the brothers Karamazov, and it could serve as an epigraph for all novelistic conclusions. Repudiation of a human mediator and renunciation of deviated transcendency inevitably call for symbols of vertical transcendency, whether the author is Christian or not. All the great novelists respond to this fundamental appeal, but sometimes they manage to hide from themselves the meaning of their response. Stendhal uses irony. Proust masks the true face of novelistic experience with romantic commonplaces, but he gives the stale symbols a profound and secret brilliance. In his work, symbols of immortality and resurrection appear in a purely aesthetic context, and only surreptitiously do they transcend the banal meaning to which romanticism reduces them. They are not operetta princes. They are true princes disguised as operetta princes. These symbols make their appearance long before the past recaptured in all the passages which are both an echo and enunciation of the original experience. One of these passages is devoted to the death and funeral of the great writer Bergotte. Quote, they buried him, but all through the night of mourning in the lighted windows, his books arranged 3 by 3 kept watch like angels with outspread wings and seemed, for him who was no more, the symbol of his resurrection, end of quote. Bergotte is famous, and Proust obviously is thinking of his posthumous glory. To that consolatrice affreusement laurée, which so irritated Valéry. But this romantic cliche is no more than a pretext in this passage. It is merely an excuse to introduce the word resurrection without disturbing the external positive and realist order. The death and resurrection of Bergotte foreshadow the death and resurrection of the author himself, the second birth, from which remembrance of things past springs. The true resonance of the sentence just quoted is derived from the expectance of that resurrection. Along with the images of deviated transcendency, we can discern the outlines of the symbolism of vertical transcendency. Contrasted with the demoniacal idols who drag the narrator down into the abyss are angels with outspread wings. We must interpret this symbolism in the light of the past recaptured. Quote, the greatness of Proust, end of quote, André Malraux correctly notes, quote, became evident when the publication of the past recaptured revealed the significance of a literary achievement which, up to that point, did not seem to surpass that of Dickens, end of quote. It was the past recaptured, to be sure, which gave Proust's creation its meaning, but other novelistic conclusions contributed to that meaning as well. The brothers Karamazov makes it impossible for us to consider the resurrection of Bergot simply a romantic commonplace, and in the same way, the past recaptured, which Proust first entitled Perpetual Adoration, makes it impossible for us to see in the religious meditations of the brothers Karamazov merely religious propaganda, external to the novel itself. If Dostoevsky suffered so much while writing those pages, it is not because he found it a boring task, but because he considered them of prime importance. In the second part of the Brothers Karamazov, little Ilyusha dies for the sake of all the heroes of Dostoevsky's novels, and the communion which springs from that death is Balzac's and Proust's sublime lucidity shared by many. The structure of crime and redeeming punishment transcends the solitary consciousness. Never did a novelist make such a radical break with romantic and Promethean individualism. The conclusion of the Brothers Karamazov is born on the highest crest of Dostoevsky's genius. The last distinctions between novelistic and religious experience are abolished. But the structure of experience has not changed. It is easy to recognize in the words memory, death, love, and resurrection found in the mouths of the children of this novel the themes and symbols that inspire the creative ardor of the agnostic author of The Past Recaptured. And we end with a quote from the Brothers Karamazov. We love you, they all caught it up. There were tears in the eyes of many of them. Hurrah for Karamazov, Kolya shouted ecstatically. And may the dear boy's memory live forever, Alyosha added again with feeling. Forever, the boys chimed in again. Karamazov, cried Kolya. Can it be true what's taught us in religion, that we shall all rise again from the dead and shall live and see each other again, all? Ilyusha too? Certainly we shall all rise again. Certainly we shall see each other and shall tell each other with joy and gladness all that has happened, Alyosha answered, half laughing, half enthusiastic.